Welcome to Let's Talk Memoir, a podcast for memoir lovers, readers, and writers. I'm your host, Ronit Plank. Let's Talk Memoir is also a Substack newsletter. About once a month, I publish memoir craft advice, answer questions about memoir writing, and share my latest classes and upcoming events. You can go to substack.com and subscribe to Let's Talk Memoir for free. You can also find me, Ronit, on Instagram and on Blue Sky. Before this episode begins, I want to share with you a couple of offerings coming up in September and October if you are interested in taking a memoir class. First up, September 4th begins my 92nd Street Y Roundtable class, which will be online. It's called Reading Contemporary Memoirs, The Complicated Mother. And we're going to be meeting on Fridays for 1 hour online to discuss 4 different memoirs and their narrative arcs and how the memoirist portrays the complicated mothers in their life and talk about the legacy of complicated childhoods and attachment and really anything we want to when it comes to these narratives and the choices that the memoirists made. There's no homework, there's no writing. This is talking and thinking and delving into narrative structure and into the psycho-emotional dynamics on the page. If you are looking for a writing class, a memoir writing class, my next one begins on October 13th, and this is online at the University of Washington Continuum School, so it's open to all. It is called Memoir Writing, Finding Your Story, and we're meeting in the evenings. Each class is 3 hours long, and we're going to be writing, doing prompts. You're going to get to workshop your material. We're going to be analyzing memoirs, talking about all the tools that we discuss on the show. And if you're interested in either of these classes, go to ronitplank.com and scroll down the page and you will find these upcoming events and links to find more information and to register. And I've got another class launching in 2027, which I will post soon. That is going to be another class that's about 5 weeks long in an exciting new venue that I'm excited to share about. I can't do it yet, but I will soon. If you'd like updates, please subscribe to my Let's Talk Memoir Substack. Those are free subscriptions, and I will always keep you posted about new class offerings. Before we get to this episode, I want to thank you for being a Let's Talk Memoir listener, and thank you so much for sharing the episodes and for subscribing to the Let's Talk Memoir Substack. I have some other really good news to share with you, and I will be doing that soon. And now, on to this week's episode. Today, my guest is Dr. Kara Zivin, who is a health services and policy researcher who uses social science and public health tools to improve health and functional outcomes for vulnerable populations with mental health and substance use disorders, behavioral health conditions, including pregnant and postpartum women, veterans, and other adults. She is the Marcia A. Wallenstein, MD, Collegiate Professor of Psychiatry, Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and Professor of Health Management and Policy at the University of Michigan, Research Career Scientist at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Senior Health Researcher at Mathematics, located in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Dr. Zivin completed her PhD and MS at Harvard University, her MA and BA at Johns Hopkins University, and her MFA at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Welcome, Kara.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here. And I have to admit, after reading all of that you've done and accomplished, I feel like I still need to call you Dr. Zivin. But I think I will call you Kara. And we met in
Please
person.
do.
Yes, okay. I have permission from the doctor. So we met in person at AWP in Baltimore, and we got to connect there. And I'm so happy to have you on the show. And I would love for you to begin by sharing a bit about your new memoir, Persevered, a maternal health memoir.
So, my book, Persevered, is about my mental health crisis during pregnancy and postpartum and how I transformed that experience into research and understanding by combining data and story. So, it was really important to me to have both components in this book, my personal narrative and trying to understand what happened during my pregnancy and afterwards, but also trying to place it in the larger context of what women can go through surrounding pregnancy.
And when you think about this memoir, and we're going to talk a lot about craft and the structure and how you arrived at the form that you ended up settling with, but what was especially important to you? I know it's hard. Books are, in a way, our babies, and there's so much that we're trying to craft and fashion, but what stands out as an element or elements that were especially important to you to capture in this memoir?
So I felt like I really wanted for people to understand that this condition or struggling with your mental health during pregnancy is common. 1 out of 5 women experience it. And suicidality is actually a leading cause of pregnancy related death. And I didn't fully know that, even with all the titles and degrees that I have during my experience. And so I wanted the people to know more about it. I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that very few people get diagnosed and treated relative to how many have this condition. So part of my goal is really to increase awareness. I also really wanted to help women feel less afraid and alone if they're struggling with their mental health, and to not blame themselves in the sense of reminding people that you're not the worst moments of your life. The worst thing you've ever done doesn't define you, not only as a person, but as a parent. How things go during pregnancy and postpartum doesn't dictate how your lifelong relationship with your children will be. And so to keep that in mind, even when you're struggling in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And it's very uncanny. That seems almost like a glib word, but to think about your background, and you mentioned this in the book, to think about all the science you have behind you. You were a grant writer, you have all these different branches of work you do with research and brain health and mental health awareness and illness. And you found yourself succumbing to grave depression, suicidality, and you actually started getting treated at the building where you work as the researcher. And as it was happening to you, and I know you write about this in the book, how long did it take you to really admit to yourself that you were now the patient and that was paramount and even more important than your role in the job you'd been hired for?
It's hard to tell you the exact time window, but I feel like I was pregnant starting in the summer, and I would say in the fall, I was clearly getting worse as time went along, and letting myself talk to my mentor in particular about struggling and needing to get support. It got worse, and it's funny because I worried about writing this in the book that it would seem kind of cliche that as the weather got worse and we went into the depths of winter, so went my mental health. And then my son was born, and then I got better during spring and summers. And yet, that is really what happened. So it took a while. I write about how I didn't expect to feel so bad so early. I really struggled with sleep, and that really affected my mental health,
Yeah.
which I think is also something we don't talk about a lot. But I think many people can understand what it feels like to not sleep day after day and how that really can affect you.
Yes, this reminds me a little bit of the memoir Hellgate Bridge by Barry Miskin, who wrote about the postpartum. Actually, she has some overlap with you and your experience, and she also was hospitalized. And she writes about depersonalization and dissociation that she experienced. And I think when I think about being pregnant, I remember after I had my second child, a friend of mine asked me if I was doing okay. I didn't know that I wasn't doing okay, and I'm not sure what in particular made her ask. I mean, we were really stressed out. There were some health issues. Lack of sleep is really hard to distinguish whether that's normal lack of sleep because of a newborn or you just can't sleep.
Right.
And it's very hard because it's all so new. But I'm thinking back, my son is now 18 and a half. My daughter is almost 21 at the time of this recording. And I was really underinformed about postpartum perinatal mood disorders and depression. In reading your book, I have hope that more people will become attuned to this and that more caregivers will have an understanding and signs to look for. But back then, I also would have felt really badly about myself as a mom if that had been the truth. And now, in reading so many of these narratives and being more familiar with them, I feel like it's so common. And actually, if it doesn't happen to you, you should celebrate that, but you shouldn't be so ashamed if it does happen to you.
Right. For sure. I think there has been some increasing awareness, but part of the insidious nature of struggling with something like depression is it already makes you feel alone and bad about yourself and like you've done something wrong. And so it's hard to admit that to anyone, especially when you feel like this is a time of my life where I'm supposed to be happy and celebrating this new child in the world. And you may have seen other people experience that, new moms or pregnant women just being joyous. And so when your
Yeah.
experience doesn't align with these images that you have from people you know or from the media, then it further makes you feel like, what am I doing wrong here? What's going
Yes.
on?
Yes. It's just a circular type of self interrogation and shame, I think. So, when did you know that you wanted to incorporate your journal entries and medical records into the manuscript? And what was organizing this material like for you?
I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to write about this and went in lots of different directions before I landed in this place. Originally, I asked for my medical records to try to just understand for myself what happened, especially some of the conversations that I didn't remember at all. And I knew I wanted to bring in multiple types of material, but originally that was more focused on scientific literature that I could read. But then as I started to try to triangulate all these different sources, I also thought it was important to have an objective opinion, if you consider medical records more objective, because I'd already told the reader I was struggling with my mental health and that I had memory loss, and I didn't want to be this completely unreliable narrator. I wanted people to actually believe me. And so I felt like I needed to show from different perspectives what was happening, that it wasn't just me saying this happened, but other people observing my behavior or my feelings could share what they thought. And as far as the journals, I think part of that was just trying to understand, looking back, how did I feel at the time? One of the things I learned most from my writing programs were things like the concept that your memories change over time. I always thought of memories as sort of like a photograph. This is what I was wearing on this day, and
Me
this is like
too.
empirically true. But in fact, how I look at something now may be different than how I looked at it 10 years ago. And so I wanted to see, okay, how did I really feel at the time?
Yeah, I think it provides such a nice, full-fledged view of what you experienced, and it's kind of poignant. It's poignant at times to witness you as a patient being talked about and written about by these different specialists, and there's kindness there, and there's a very matter-of-fact quality about it, but you get to observe you, our narrator and character, as someone being observed by somebody else who is looking
Right.
for ways to help you. And then we get your voice in there with how you're feeling. And then you do include research as well. But I didn't find the research to be overbearing at all. And I'm wondering how you calibrated that. And did editors get what you were trying to do? Did anyone try to push you to do more references, less references? Can you talk about that?
When I was working on this, at first I thought I was going to have like one chapter personal story, one chapter research, maybe looking in the future, one looking back. And it didn't really work. I think when I had too much research, people thought it was dry and boring. But I wanted to have it in part to place it in the larger context, like I've said, and in part so that it almost gave the reader a break a little bit, like a stepping back, because this is obviously a pretty intense material, sort of quite emotional. And so it was sort of like this moving in and then moving back of the perspective. So there were multiple reasons, but I definitely had to play around with it and did over time to figure out how to make that balance. And I don't know that I have the perfect answer. I just tried to do the best I could in places where I thought it makes sense.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and I didn't find that it became very prescriptive or heavy on the memoir plus. I feel like your story is so firmly rooted in the book and that it's very compelling, and so these moments where you flash to the larger picture and studies and what people have learned about brain health in women who have had babies and suicidality, I think just show us that there is a little bit more to the story and that we need to continue to pursue research and keep this in mind. It's not just you. In that sense, I think that you do this job of inviting the reader into your lived experience and what you went through, but also panning out and saying, it does matter. It's not just me. And you're kind of holding yourself up as an example. I mean, you really are.
Right.
And I was curious if you would be ready to read this excerpt that we selected together. It's on page 35. And maybe you can sort of ground the reader as to where in your pregnancy you are or any other facts you think they might need to know.
So, in this part of the book, it was shortly after I had gone to meet with a doula. I had learned about doulas, I hadn't really known about them before, as someone that I sought out to be another woman in the room, be someone who had gone through a pregnancy and delivery before. I really wanted it for emotional support. So that's why I started in this chapter. But then I moved into a different section here where I'm in some ways just reflecting on my stress and my state of mind. So when alone, I tried to lift myself up. Sometimes I managed stress by cleaning, as if organizing my belongings would restore control over my life. I could think more clearly with fewer items in my field of vision. Perhaps clutter distracted me, or perhaps I needed justifiable procrastination. Looking back, I recognize this need for order and tidiness at work and at home as preparation for a new phase, an attempt to master the uncontrollable as my mind turned against itself. I would clean up the mess I had made of my life in whatever way I could muster, including filling recycling bins and trash cans, as if preparing to not return to living. In hindsight, I wanted the fighting and inner torment to stop and to live and become a mother. During my pregnancy, I resented blankness, emptiness, and despair, yet I hastened toward them, perpetuating the void, trying to purge myself of the weight of my belongings and thoughts. If I could become lighter, perhaps I would stop sinking. 6 months into my pregnancy, I hosted a mentor from another university as a visiting professor. I invited a small group of colleagues to join us for dinner on the eve of our joint presentation to my department. We went to my favorite Italian restaurant, the one where I held my post-wedding family party the previous summer. There, tucked between strip malls, the dimly lit dark wood maroon walls with gold trim created an illusion of escape, as if we were dining in an Italian villa. Instead of finding solace in the evening's soft conversation, hearty morsels, and sweet finish, my mind swerved in a different direction. By that night, I had become trapped in a relentless loop of misery, self loathing, and doubt about my inability to cope. I had not slept well in months. It never occurred to me to signal to my visiting colleague that I needed a lifeline, a kind ear. As a physician scientist, he studied, among other topics, suicide prevention. Only later would I appreciate the irony. Rather than holding on to the amber glow of the evening, I felt pulled toward another world. Darkness clouded my vision as I gripped the steering wheel on my short drive home. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I drove deep into the cold December night, dimly lit only by my car's headlamps. As I traced the route between the restaurant and home, did I swerve? Did I hesitate? Did I pause or contemplate ending my life on a highway overpass, one that may or may not have been high enough to end my anguish? Did I plan to pull off to the side of the road and jump, taking my unborn child with me? Years later, while watching a documentary, Dark Side of the Full Moon, I learned about women who struggled with perinatal depression and met their demise. One woman in New York City who strapped her baby to her chest before leaping dozens of stories to the ground would haunt me. Her crushed body landed underneath her few months old infant, who survived the fall, protected from his mother's final leap. The night before the colloquium, I did not realize how far I had fallen. No headlights could illuminate the way forward. I could not see outside the rings of light on my path to wellness and sleep. I could not reach out even to someone who had traveled from afar to support me. He could not have known how close my baby came to never wearing the onesie he brought me from his university. Neither one of us could know how close I would come to ending up a victim of the phenomenon we both studied.
Thank you, Kara. Can you share a bit about your growing need to share what you experienced in a memoir and what, if any, misgivings you had about doing so?
I think I knew fairly early on that I wanted to write about this again to try to make sense of just all the different facets of my disease and my treatment and being both a patient and professor in the same health system. But that also did lead to a lot of misgivings. I was worried about how I would be regarded professionally, and to some extent, I still do. Most scientists don't talk about their personal life, let alone this level of detail and risk. But I felt like I was also in a position where that made it that much more important for me to talk about it because if I couldn't talk about it with my training and my standing professionally and many other advantages I know I have, then I don't know how so many other people would feel in their circumstances who may not have had health insurance or a partner or safe housing or any number of other facets. And so I thought maybe I could make something good out of a terrible experience.
Yes, I really relate to that. And I have had a couple of questions from people who connect with me and Let's Talk Memoir on Substack about their misgivings regarding coming out with a story and the implications it might have in their professional life. Also, family, that comes up a lot, of course, how it's going to affect our relatives, but whether or not they can claim their story and what repercussions it might have on them and their career. And so I am really curious. I think it's really good to talk about this. And do you know if your colleagues have read the book or have people talked to you about it?
Yes. So I started publishing essays about this before. So this was not completely new when the book came out. So people knew. Very few people knew at the time. Some people have known since then. And some people have said to me, like, I had no idea. I just thought you were on maternity leave, kind of thing. By and large, I have felt quite supported. I purposely do not name any names in the book. I do not even directly say where I work, even though it's not hard to figure out. I don't mention my family's name. My immediate family has a different last name than me. I was very careful and yet really wanted to be honest, even if it didn't always put everyone and everything in the most positive light,
Hmm.
because I felt like that's part of the story, that's part of reality. As you know, and your other authors know, once you put a book out in the world, it's out of your hands. You've done what you could, but it was why it was so important to me to do it well. I was going to put my personal life and my professional life at risk. I really wanted to have it be a good book. That's part of why I
Yeah.
went back to get an MFA.
Yeah, and when you were working on some of this material or reading over your medical reports or these interviews, how did you take care of yourself? What was it like for you to revisit this version of yourself who had been incredibly vulnerable and quite broken?
It's really painful at times. I would say it took me a long time to do this. I started writing this book in 2015. So it wasn't just like I sat down and did all of it all at once. And I would definitely have to take breaks. It could be really hard to revisit. And no matter how many times I've looked at my medical records, I find new things every time. I think it's also what's made it a bit of a relief to be out in the world because it's
Mhm.
finished, or at least the book itself is finished. And I don't have to keep tormenting myself over and over, which doesn't mean it won't always be there because I think
Mhm.
about it every single day. But at the same time, there's some sense of, okay, I've done this, I've shared the hard thing, I've done it, and now I don't have to revisit it every single day going forward.
Yes, and also I think too, for me, and I don't want to speak for you, you've told your version of the story as best as you can. Somebody else can tell the story of what happened to you if they want, but this is your account to the best of your knowledge and
Yep.
understanding, and you've put it together in a way that satisfies you or pleases you or that you're proud of. And so you've gotten a voice. You've gotten a voice
Right.
back, which I think is part of the memoir, the reclamation of memoir. And I did learn a lot about postpartum depression and psychosis that I didn't know. And I have this quote I pulled out from page 113, quote, "A large meta-analysis similarly underscored that the strongest predictors of postpartum depression included depression, anxiety, and stressful life events during pregnancy or early postpartum, low levels of social support, and a prior history of depression. When I look at this list, I relate to all these predictors, even though my husband and family tried to support me. Why does it matter whether depression begins before or after delivery? Too often we focus on the latter as if what happens before birth holds less importance. We worry about postpartum depression and its impact on infants. Although some individuals experience new onset illness postpartum, many do not. My depression diagnosis long predated my pregnancy, as did my history of therapy. And I really also appreciated that you shared, while respecting privacy, that your sister also struggled with depression. You talk about in your past that both of you had some concerns about being a mom, about getting pregnant, and how that would affect you. And I'm wondering how you think your academic life and expertise in research affected your own understanding of what you were beginning to experience during your pregnancy.
I was definitely aware that I had risk factors like you talked about and that I was struggling with my mental health during pregnancy. I don't think I anticipated how bad it would become. how sick I would really get, to the point where my family didn't know how to relate to me. They didn't know what to do to help me. They tried, some of my colleagues did. So I think it was much more severe than I would have imagined. But at the same time, it didn't necessarily surprise me to struggle some. And I think that applies. Part of why I wrote what you just read is because I feel like we make this big dividing line between pregnancy and postpartum. And yes, obviously things have changed, but lots of people have mental health conditions of one type or another going into pregnancy. And one of the things I talk about is actually how you may increase your risk of relapse during pregnancy by stopping, say, an antidepressant that you might have
Yes.
been taking beforehand. And we know that there are women taking antidepressants before and during pregnancy. So having some awareness of what your risk factors might be, I think can help inform decisions, because everybody has to make their own decision about what feels comfortable and safe and appropriate for your circumstances. And there's no one right answer. You're trying to balance the baby's health with the mother's health, because if the mother is really sick, it isn't going to help the baby.
Right, of course. And even the very basic need of sleep. Not getting sleep is a torture, and you can't make it happen. It's
Yeah.
really, really hard. There's this other excerpt that you and I talked about, which begins on page 42 about your January days. And I was hoping you could read that too.
Yes. My January days during that unusually cold and snowy winter became filled not only with doctor's appointments full of angst and fear, but also with classes and activities meant to prepare me for delivery. Lamaze, breastfeeding, newborn care, car seat safety, maternity ward tour. I could not help noticing how much I did not fit in. I could not escape the sense that other expectant mothers and fathers embodied a way to prepare for a new baby, which to me seemed impossible. I felt like a failure. One night I sat cross legged on the gray carpeted floor of the Lamaze Center on a chair without legs designed to support pregnant women's backs. My husband sat silently next to me. Other couples chatted happily, but I fixed my eyes downward, saying nothing. During the class break, I stood in line for the restroom, which had only two stalls to accommodate several women with large bellies. Despite having seen these women on multiple occasions, I remained mute, even in tight quarters. Their banter and camaraderie alienated me further. I avoided looking at myself in the mirror above the sink before I dashed out the door. I can only imagine what they thought of me.
Thank you so much. So I wonder, when you think about the book promotion and any kind of book talks you're doing and getting this book into the world and writing the book and talking about your story, what does it feel like, and where or does shame still exist in talking about this story and bringing the book into the world?
I think the shame and guilt is always there. It's very hard to face reading some of the more difficult passages to both people I know and strangers, including when my family has been present or close friends. But I also think, as I've said, it's been a relief. And in some ways, it's also been empowering. It's given me opportunities to meet and connect with people that I likely wouldn't have otherwise. I've also had some really positive experiences where, I mean, women come up and hug me and they're crying, or women my mother's generation have said, I wish I knew, and I'm going to give this book to my daughter, those kinds of things. So I didn't necessarily know, but I had hoped that it would help people. So to hear from people, not only around the country, but around the world that have reached out has been really nice. That my difficult story that started with me lying in a bed crying in the dark has now touched other lives.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And I pulled this one last quote on page 123. Quote, as a society, we do not question whether to treat diabetes or cancer. Yet, given stigma and a long history of treating mental health as separate from physical health, often the rationale for mental health treatment requires indicating benefit beyond individual need. And I wonder why you think this is, and if you feel there's hope for change, especially when it comes to maternal women's health or even women's health.
So, starting from the perspective of thinking about trying to justify mental health, I've been in my career more than 25 years, and it's always been the case where we have to make the economic argument. It's not enough to say we should treat people because that's the right thing to do. It's much more the case of saying, if you don't treat people, it's going to cost society not only the healthcare costs, but people losing productivity at work. And that's part of what leads to my frustration because we don't say, well, here's the cost of diabetes care. And so I don't know if it's worth it. And so that has always been frustrating to me that it wasn't enough. And that is true for mental health, but we don't even focus as much on mental health or maternal health or both with things like how insurance companies measure their quality of their care. And so, one of the things I like to say is what we measure drives what we do. So, if we don't even talk about mental health or maternal health and we don't assess people or keep track of it, then it's certainly not going to drive limited healthcare resources towards supporting women and families. And so I'm hopeful that with increased awareness of really this public health crisis of maternal mental health and maternal mortality, the United States is the leading country in the developed world for maternal deaths. And many of them, especially related to mental health, are preventable.
Hmm.
So trying to put that in context makes it hard and frustrating when I feel like we still have to often justify the costs. So part of what I included in the book as well is some of my own research, and probably my most cited study is showing that the cost of untreated perinatal mood anxiety disorders in 2017 was $14.2 billion.
Wow.
That if we had treated it, we could have
Hmm.
avoided those costs for mothers and for families. And so when
Hmm.
you put it in that perspective, it's hard not to just be really upset.
Yes. And you also underscore in the book, and I really appreciated this too, you have resources. You are a white woman. You are educated. You have a job. You had health insurance. You had a family there to support you. You had the background and the experience. And yet, you still really, really struggled. So imagine dealing with what you dealt with without those resources, even one of them. You take even one of those away. And then if
Right.
you add any kind of insecurity financially or any kind of food insecurity, anything, you've got just even more struggles and worries for that population. So it is really stunning. And I'm very happy to be able to talk a little bit about this here. I hope that the needle gets moved. If those of us who don't pay a lot of attention to this or don't feel invested in this, at the very least, I think those who care about the bottom line should be moved by the figures, right? Hopefully, hopefully.
I mean, some professional organizations have increased their recommendations for things like we should screen for depression, not just postpartum, but during pregnancy and potentially more than once, because how you feel in your first trimester is different than the week before you're due, which is different than the week after your baby arrives versus a year later. It's not always the same. And we focus so much on the mother when she's pregnant and when she has a forthcoming baby, but after pregnancy, it's as if we're done with the woman and we're just focused on the baby still. And so trying to pay attention to both, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think you had a quote in there, and I don't remember who you attributed it to, that the baby is the candy and the mom is the wrapper. Is that right?
Yes, my colleague Allison Stubbe, who is an OBGYN at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, has used that analogy, and I really appreciate it. We care about the baby or the candy when it's in the wrapper, and then afterwards we discard the wrapper. And I feel like, unfortunately, some women feel that or experience that. And
Mhm.
I think that's really unfair and unfortunate.
Yeah. What advice would you like to share with writers working on their memoirs?
So that's been an interesting experience. I really appreciate you asking about craft for memoir, and it's part of why I wanted to talk to you. I think you probably have this experience where once you say you've written a book or someone knows about it, they'll say, "Oh, I want to write a book." Everybody wants to write a book somehow. And yet, I feel like a lot of that has to do with what they want to say as opposed to thinking about what a reader wants to read, because those may be different things. And I really tried to look at it, not just this is what I want to say, but this is the protagonist character, and here are the others, and how do they feel, and what do they think, and what do I hope a reader might experience, both in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of their emotions. And so I think being really mindful of how you come across and being very intentional as opposed to just I just want to tell you about my life, and
Yeah.
obviously that doesn't necessarily work out in the sense of if publishers may or may not be interested. And that's a whole other challenge of trying to find a publisher. It's not enough to just want to write a book.
Yeah.
So I think really being intentional about what you say and why, and whatever the answer is that's right for you is fine. It's just knowing how and why you made those decisions.
Right. And what work the material is doing for the
Right.
story and the arc and the propulsion of the memoir and the journey that the memoirist is on. And I'm sure there's pieces of your book you had to leave, you had to take out.
I did. And it's really hard because I can see where they once were. I had a lot of epigraphs, I had more data. I also work at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and all of that work got cut. And it was actually important because I testified before Congress on veteran suicide prior to my own struggles. And yet, trying to make it have a coherent narrative, some things got left on the cutting room floor, unfortunately.
Yeah, memoir can be a beast. Let me just say, when I think about writing another one, I just think about all the different considerations. I mean, even though I talk about memoir all the time, I just know how much work will be ahead of me. What are a few books that informed your writing process that you'd like to recommend?
So the book that I always turn to is Sarah Manguso's The Two Kinds of Decay, because it really taught me that memoir doesn't have to be really long and detailed chapters. And actually, my book originally, many of these chapters were 3 or 4 shorter chapters. I really liked the brief shards of just a single scene or a single point. So that was one thing. I also really liked Tell Me Everything You Can't Remember by Christine Hyung Ok Lee. And part of why I turned to that book is because she was 33 years old, I believe, and she had a stroke. And then she talks about recovering from that. And I was partially interested because my father was a neurologist and he studied stroke, but I was also interested in how she wrote about things she couldn't remember, because that was also a key part of my book. It wasn't just about mental health, but memory loss. And then the third one is Joan Wickersham's The Suicide Index. And part of why I was interested in that was that I liked the structure of breaking the different segments. She wrote it as an index, and originally, an earlier version of my book, actually, my MFA thesis was organized alphabetically. And I really liked it that way, but other people felt like it was confusing because it was all out of order in terms of time. I was encouraged to restructure it chronologically, which I resisted for a long time, but now I see that it worked better. So, trying to take the advice of mentors and editors.
Oh, I love learning that. Okay, that was a real big structural change.
It was a huge change. It took me several years to sort of regroup from that one and figure out how to make it work. And one more book I want to mention that's a more recent book, because those are a bit older, is Maggie Smith's You Could Make This Place Beautiful. I love that she came at it with different perspectives, different chapters. One might be a quote, one might be her personal story. And I really like the layered approach to memoir. I also hope to write another one.
I picked up that vibe just a few minutes ago. I thought, oh, there's going to be
Yes,
another one, isn't there? Yeah.
someday, I hope. I really liked bringing in the medical, the societal, the personal health, the family, different kinds
Yeah.
of data. So
Another book you might want to check out. She was a guest on the show. Her name is Naomi Cohen, and she wrote the Braille Encyclopedia. And so hers is a really interesting format too. And it's out, I think, from Rose Metal Press. But I loved what she did with that. She begins to lose her vision in midlife, and she goes pretty much legally blind. And so this is called the Braille Encyclopedia as she learns and contemplates and grapples with everything that's happening to her. So you might enjoy that one too. And
I would,
definitely
yes, thank you.
nonlinear, rather more like lyric and experimental. So you might really enjoy that. I'm going to put those books you recommended in the show notes. And I'm also going to put links to where people can connect with your work and find you. So please share those links and where you think people should go and get a copy of Persevered.
So I have a website. My name's okarazivin.com. If you look at the part that says /book, I have the book here, Persevered. Here, I will show it. So I have on my website, I have the book, and I also have links to various different places you can purchase it, including we have an audio version. And I really recommend that because Tavia Gilbert recorded the book, and she is really a wonderful narrator. So that's where you can find it. But also on my website, if you're interested in my research, in media events, in other writing, it's all there.
Great. Thank you. I'll put everything in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much for being my guest, Kara, and congratulations on Persevered. And I just wish you the best of luck with all that you continue to write and think about. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for the service that you do by paying attention to memoirs and bringing in authors and to share their experiences. I really enjoy hearing about it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Memoir. For more about my story and the project that started me on my memoir-loving path, you can check out my memoir, When She Comes Back, which is available wherever books are sold, and as an audiobook that I narrated. For more about this episode and my guest, please visit the links in the show notes. You can also find a complete catalog of Let's Talk Memoir episodes at ronitplank.com/Let's Talk Memoir. Let's Talk Memoir is also on Substack. About once a month, I publish memoir craft advice, additional interviews, and upcoming classes that I'm offering. There's no paywall. If you are a fan of Let's Talk Memoir, please feel free to share it with your friends. And if you feel moved to leave a podcast rating and review, I appreciate it very much. That helps more writers and readers find the show. Thank you so much for being here.